Okay, let's get started. Welcome to a webinar on copyright credit and scooping, the tricky details of protocol sharing. I am Lenny Tadelman, one of the co-founders of Protocols.io, and this will be about 15-20 minutes of me going over some of the interesting questions that we've gotten since we've launched in 2014. And one thing to note is that we are recording this webinar. We'll be posting it up on YouTube for those who missed it later, so keep that in mind. And at the end, we'll have 5-10 minutes for Q&A, and you can either unmute yourself at that point and just speak, or you can also ask questions through the chat, so whatever you prefer. And with that, let's get started. So the agenda is to go over some tricky questions, such as what happens when you share a protocol that's already been previously published in another protocol journal or in a research article. Can you share something from a company? And what about plagiarism if you're putting up a protocol that is verbatim taken from another method that, again, has been previously published? So that's not so much already in the legal realm, but more in the ethical. What happens if you enter a protocol that you didn't develop yourself, but you're just using it, you're taking credit away from someone? And then the question of what is the right time to share? What if you're not sure that your protocol works perfectly? Can you share it? What's the right way to do it? And the last thing we'll talk about is will your paper be in trouble if you previously shared the protocol? So those are the things we'll go through, and then there will be Q&A at the end. And before we get started, just to frame this, here's one of my favorite tweets on the issue of trying to find protocols. So looking for a protocol in a 97 paper. This is from a biologist, Morgan Lane. Looking for protocol 97 paper is described in 96, finds 96 paper is described in 87, finds 87 paper, paywall. And this, of course, is an incredibly frustrating experience that is probably pretty common to most people who have read research papers. Here's a similar one on from a physicist. Devices were fabricated as previously described, previously described, previously described. The original reference just says devices were fabricated with conventional methods. So good luck. And this is exactly at Protocols.io what we hope to move away from. So our mission is to get us to a point where we've changed our culture and we're sharing method details before, during, and after publication. And one of the things that the tweets above highlight is the themes that we'll go through about how do you properly give credit, what happens when we're missing the details from the papers that we published. And in addition to those tweets, there is an email that we got at Protocols.io not too long ago, which really nailed these points. So here's an email from a postdoc at University of British Columbia, which said, "Hi Lenny, I have a hopefully quick question that perhaps you could help me with. Basically, I want to upload a protocol that I'm building that is a composite of several other protocols that have been published in 2 different journal articles. Some sections of the protocol may be word for word from these journal article supplementary materials, but they do not exist on Protocols.io, so I cannot fork them. Do you have any suggestions for me regarding this? Is it sufficient to cite the original protocols within hours? Or would that still be considered some form of copyright infringement?" So really dense email. There's a lot that's going on here. And the first and probably the easier part to deal with is it copyright? So this is something we looked into before we even launched Protocols.io. And there we seem to be in a pretty good space. So from the United States Copyright Office. Here is an actual document on works not protected by copyright. And for example, cookbooks, the recipes in the cookbooks are not copyrightable. So here we have ideas, methods, and systems. Copyright law expressly excludes copyright protection from any idea, procedure, system, method of operation, concept, principle, or discovery, regardless of the form in which it is described, explained, illustrated, or embodied. The office may, however, register a literary, graphic, or artistic description, explanation, or illustration of the idea, procedure, process, system, or method of operation, provided that the work contains a sufficient amount of original authorship. However, copyright protection will extend only to the original expression in that work and not the underlying idea, methods, or systems described or explained. So when it comes to copyright, if this has been previously published, because these are methods, instructions, description of the reagents that you're using, so these are step-by-step instructions, it doesn't look like copyright actually applies. So maybe sharing the PDF of the protocol of the method section could be a problem. But if you enter it into protocols.io or into Google Docs, and I'm not a legal scholar, I'm not an attorney, this is our interpretation and our conversations with our legal team, but it doesn't look like that's actually copyrightable. And since we've launched in 2014, there are about 4,000 public protocols, not including versions, that different scientists have shared since 2014. And so far, we've never had a case of a publisher complaining, sending us a takedown notice about anything that is on protocols.io. So I know that those issues do come up with like ResearchGate and academia.edu when you share actual PDFs, but we've never had an instance of something like this at protocols.io for the methods themselves. And our recommendation, if you go to the FAQ page, our recommendation is that it looks like you're fairly safe and on good legal standing to share the protocol instructions, even if they're verbatim. But when it comes to the rest of the manuscript, the figures, if it's not open access, CC BY, the figures, some of the other sections of the article may be copyrighted. So in that case, I would just link to the paper and only focus on the protocol steps themselves. And a similar, very similar thing applies to protocols from companies that sell chemicals and reagents. Again, copyright is copyright, and we have a lot of protocols. So here's a company called QIAGEN. If you search for them on protocols.io, we don't have any formal relationship with this company, but there are a lot of scientists who have come in. You can see there are 27 results, and they've added things like modified QIAGEN PCR purification prep. Again, never had any problem with companies. In fact, some of them explicitly come to protocols.io and intentionally themselves share their protocols. They tend to love this because they want to see how scientists are using them. They want to see if there are questions, if anything is unclear, what other applications are there, if people are forking, copying, cloning, and then modifying the protocols, what are they changing? So this is an example of New England Biolabs, which is on the East Coast, an hour north of Boston, company that supplies enzymes for biomedical research. They've shared 125 of their most popular protocols on protocols.io themselves. And sorry, I'm just trying to move my Zoom controls so it doesn't interfere. And there are many other companies that have done the same explicitly. So again, just as with journals, we've never had a complaint if a researcher shares what they've done, the specific steps. And it would be very strange for a publisher or company to complain about it if scientists are trying to improve the rigor and reproducibility of the knowledge that they're sharing by describing the actual steps. So That, I think, is the, as I said, somewhat easier part of this. The next question is it ethical? So maybe legal, but is it ethical? We've all been taught to avoid plagiarism, but what happens with methods? Can you take things verbatim? Should you be playing around with text? And that email from the postdoc in British Columbia also touches on this, where the person writes some sections of the protocol, maybe word for word from these journal article supplementary materials, right? So maybe legal, but is it ethical? And this is a question that comes up over and over on social media since we launched in 2014. There are many, many times that I've seen someone ask. Very often, even editors of journals don't actually know what the answer to it is. So here's an example of someone who says, I hate writing method sections for work that is the same as previous work. Tweaking wording that works to avoid safe plagiarism is tedious. And as I said, a lot of sometimes journal editors aren't even aware of what the proper flow for something like this is. For your own methods, for other people's methods, can you do word for word? And here's a reply. At that point, Dr. Barbour was the head of the COPE, Committee on Publication Ethics, and her response was, there is no reason to do that. If it's the same method, use the same words and reference it. And she gave a link to an actual document that COPE had shared specifically on text recycling. So this is not plagiarism, it's text recycling. And they have a section on methods in there, which says explicitly use of similar or identical phrases in method sections where there are limited ways to describe a method is not unusual. In fact, text recycling may be unavoidable when using a technique that the author has described before, and it may actually be of value when a technique that is common to a number of papers is described. Editors should use their discretion and knowledge of the field when deciding how much text overlap is acceptable in the method section. An important factor to consider is whether the authors have been transparent, stating that the methods have already been described elsewhere and providing a citation. So whether it's your own protocol or somebody else's, if you share it on protocols.io, it may be the exact same words that actually can help with comprehension. It can help with consistency and reproducibility. So don't try to change things just for the sake of changing them. Just make sure you cite where it comes from and where it was originally shared, if you know that. And moving on into away from COPE and things that have previously been discussed by the Copyright Office or the Committee on Publication Ethics, something that we get occasionally is a question of, am I stealing credit from other people? I didn't develop the protocol, I just use it. Am I the right person to put it in? And this is, there's no legal answer to it. This is a really interesting question, right? So going back to these tweets, if we don't share the details, then we're back in this situation where our method sections of the papers are kind of like peeling onions, trying to find, layer after layer, trying to find the original, which may or may not exist. So if we are on the side of I'm not the one who developed this, I just used it, so I won't describe the step-by-step details, we are hurting the readers, right? So this is actually a really tricky question. So what we've done at Protocols.io is we've separated the content of the protocol from the author. So underneath, so here is an example. Protocol, RNA later recipe on Protocols.io. And underneath the title, there is the author field and affiliation, as you would find in a research article. There can be multiple authors, multiple affiliations. But then you can also see a little bit lower below, there is the contact information. So the contact is the person who entered it. The person can leave, there might be turnover, the contact can change, the author field stays put. And on the right-hand side, you can see there are questions that people can ask directly on the protocol that will be emailed to the contact, but we don't necessarily email it to the author because we don't usually know the contact information for the author. So the contact on the protocol is the person that entered it. It's not necessarily the author. But one of the things that we feel is that this is actually the right flow. The authors might have moved on. The authors might no longer be in the lab. You want a contact who is there currently using, can answer questions about the protocol. So it's in the best interest of the research community that we have these two separate categories. The authorship is for credit. The contact is the person who shared it, or maybe they didn't even share it, but the person who shared it has now left the lab and reassigned it to somebody else in the lab that can answer questions, which is also helpful. And we keep track of the record history of reassignments of the protocols. One thing to consider, if this is a protocol that has been developed in your research group over years and multiple people contributing to it, maybe it's a rotation student that came in, an undergraduate who worked on it, and it's something that evolves, which methods often do, you can consider using language in the author field, like the name of your group, saying this has been developed in the Rhine lab. Right? So there will still be a contact, but then you're giving credit to the research group that developed it. And some of the protocols, if there are 300 steps in it, is pretty involved. And just the act of sharing publicly, if it hasn't been done before, putting it into Wikipedia-like central repository, that's something that we do want to acknowledge and reward it as well, right? So we do want to highlight, we do want to thank people that do it. So authoring is obviously the lion's share of the work, but if you took 2 hours to take something that's been floating around the lab for years but has never been explicitly shared, you should have credit for that as well. That's our feel. And moving towards the end of the questions we wanted to discuss, let's suppose you're not worried about the proper credit and the wording. This is a protocol that you're developing in the lab. Maybe you're the lead on this, so you're the right author, but the question is, when do I share it? So this does come up. There is hesitation. Maybe it worked 1 or 2 times, but I haven't repeated it enough times for it to be a paper yet. Depending on your confidence in the technique, when do you share on protocols.io? And this is not something that I'm going to give a recommendation on. We have a preference from the protocols.io side. We think that it's super valuable for people. The earlier you share, the more you're helping the research community. But we do acknowledge that if you share too early and the protocol is wrong, you might be misleading people. So our approach to this has been, when you're publishing, to give you the ability to say very clearly, is it a protocol that's robust? How confident are you as the author? So we don't let other people rate it. We just let other people ask questions. But in order to publish a protocol, the second thing we ask you after you put in the authors is, please certify it, give it a status. Is it working? Is it in development? Is it other? And we let you actually fill in the details of what it means, what you've chosen. So if you say other, you can put in more detailed information on what you mean. And one example of it, is, here's a really popular protocol from Human Cell Atlas development community. And underneath the affiliations and the author field, you can see it says this is a working protocol. So all public protocols will have the status showing. And if you mouse over it, there is a pop-up that says, we use this protocol in our group and it is working. And in contrast, here's a recently shared, just a couple of days ago, protocol in the Proteus development community. And that has a tag which is other, right? It's not in development, it's not working, it's other. And if you mouse over that, it says we attempted to genetically transform S. robusta, but did not succeed. This collection provides protocols that we use to arrive at the transformations, and everything included should work. On the guidelines, you can find the plasmids that we attempted to use for the transformations. So this is just a self-certification system where you as the author are letting people know, is it ready or not? But of course, if you think that it's premature, there are other ways of sharing, and I'll touch on that in the last 30 seconds in just a minute. And on a related part, when to share, even if you're comfortable with it and you think it works, a frequent question that we get is, will it get me into trouble with a journal? So again, this is something that's in our FAQ. This has come up very early on since our launch. And what we say is, we know that sometimes scientists are concerned that making their protocol public might disqualify them from publishing the research. That is not the case. Just as you can share results and methods at a research conference, you can share protocols online. In fact, the vast majority of biomedical publishers allow even entire submitted papers to be posted on preprint servers like bioRxiv. And there is a link in our FAQ, there is a link to the publisher policies. These are not considered prior publications as they're not peer-reviewed. So what we encourage you is take a look at the journal. If the journal or the publisher accepts preprints, you're definitely safe with protocols. If they do not, there is a rare exception, like I think JAMA Medical Journal doesn't. If it's a rare exception and they don't take preprints, you might want to get in touch with the editor and just confirm. But we've never heard of a researcher being told not to share. And in fact, there are many journals, over 500 now, that have added protocols.io to author guidelines, specifically encouraging people to share. And the example from Public Library of Science, if you go to their author submission guidelines under materials and methods, they say we recommend and encourage depositing lab protocols and protocols.io. And then they specifically say in the highlighted section below, they say you can make your protocols public at any time by selecting publish. Some people choose not to do that, so then they just get a DOI. It's unlisted at that point, and they wait for the paper to be published. If it's an open access paper, we detect the publication event. We'll add the citation back to the paper from the protocol itself, or you can come in and manually push it to be public. But once you have a DOI, that link will resolve. It's just that until the paper is published, if you haven't explicitly made it public, it's unlisted, so Google doesn't see it. It doesn't come up in search results on protocols.io. And of course, as I promised in the last 30 seconds, if you're not publishing yet, if you're afraid of being scooped, if you're not ready to share it for whatever reason, just as at Google Docs, you can click the share button on your protocol and you can share with individuals by email. There is a private link, so there would be no login required. You can just send the link for someone to view it. If you want to share it with collaborators that might be helping to edit or comment on it, then you'd use the share by email, or you can share with an entire research group or community that you're part of on protocols.io, and then everybody gets a notification, as you can see below, notified by email. Everybody gets a notification about a new protocol that you just added. So those are the options that you have. And as I mentioned, if you're not ready to click make public, there is a get DOI button. And there you're confirming that this is an unlisted protocol. You will not be able to edit it once there is a DOI. You can only create a new version, but it's still not fully public and searchable. So there's that disclaimer. And this entire presentation, it's a Google presentation, so there's the link at the bottom for it. There's the link at the bottom for it. And with that, I'll stop and answer any questions. My email is here, so if you forget to ask something during this part, feel free to email me. And I'll actually put this for anybody that wants the slides. I'll stop sharing now, but I'll put it into the chat. Zoom. All right, any questions? Feel free to type it in or just unmute yourself. So there's some, okay, so here's the question. Is it okay to just use the platform to organize labs protocols in general? Absolutely. So I didn't say this, sorry, for those who are not familiar with protocols.io. Every protocol that you create is private by default. You can just share it internally with your colleagues. There are 20,000 total protocols, just over 20,000 at this point, and 5,000 of them, including versions, are public. 15,000 are private. So more people are actually using it for private organization. There are biotechs that obviously will never share, but if you're an academic lab, you can start using it. You can organize your lab's protocols, and then when it's time to publish, it actually saves you time because with a click of a button, you get a DOI and can link to it from the materials and methods. So good question. You can use it as it fits your stage of the workflow. And in our mission, in the very beginning, I said that our mission is to make it easy to capture these details before, during, and after publication. And the before part is equally as important as you're doing the method development, as you're doing the research itself. You know, there's turnover in labs, you have new students that are joining, so being able to have organized methods and workflows for your research group, I think is very helpful. Other questions? All right. Well, as I said, my email is lenny@protocols.io. You can also always get in touch. Through our contact and help buttons. We tend to be very responsive. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone who participated. There's a question, was the first part recorded? I clicked record at the very beginning. I warned people that it is being recorded. Hopefully it is and was. I'll check the Zoom file. If anything, the slides are available. As I said, I just pasted them into the Zoom. The slides are available, and I can always re-record. Practice this a little bit more and have more fluid delivery without Zoom technical issues and pop-ups distracting me during presentation. So either way, we'll make it public. And Anita just said we will also send out the recording afterwards. So thank you everyone for participating, and don't hesitate to get in touch. Cheers.
Bye-bye.